Welcome. My name is Tamara with Love in a Big World, and this is our monthly EducateU webinar. And my guest today is Tamsin Evans with Pure Creative Arts out of New York City. And we are going to be talking about how we can use the arts to support the mental health of children and adolescents. So Tamsin, welcome once again. I'm so glad that you're with us. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Would you please give everyone a little bit of background about you and your work with Pure Creative Arts?
Yes. So firstly, Tamara, thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be with you, and also just have loved getting to know you over the last bit of time. So love what you're doing. Thank you. So yeah, my name's Tamsin Evans. I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called Pure Creative Arts, and we use catalytic performances as a way to connect with young people, help them open up and talk about how to talk about issues. And then we marry that with ongoing curriculum that really helps young people go through a process to look at areas around social emotional learning. So in short, that's a little bit. The organization began in the UK, but we have been running in the US since 2016 from New York, as Tamara said. So yeah.
Great. So Tamsin, tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest struggles that the youth are facing, especially given our current situation here in the US and in the world?
Yeah, as like COVID and where we are right now. So yeah, so obviously this is such a challenging time for all of us, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, but particularly for young people, particularly for parents, for educators, as education's been closed. And so one of actually the first things that we did as an organization, as we found ourselves in this situation, was really to begin to do research into what are the felt needs of young people coming out of the situation that we're in. So from education being closed for a period of time, having times of isolation, being at home, actually going remotely, and then actually as education begins to reopen and schools begin to open, like what are the felt needs that are most specific to young people. And as we did that, we did a number of different things. We did kind of research directly with young people, different questionnaires that young people would fill in. And we also did kind of extensive research into like looking at different findings kind of globally, actually, not just in America. And so a lot of what we found, and I'm going to try not to talk about this forever, but like a lot of what we kind of found in that was that in terms of, say, for example, anxiety, young people were saying that they, of course, had a heightened sense of anxiety, that every single young person was saying, actually, everything that's going on, actually how they're dealing with their anxiety is higher, and also trying to navigate healthy ways to cope with the anxiety that they were feeling, and actually the situation they were in. When they asked whether they actually felt resourced or like knew how to do that, young people were saying either that they didn't or they didn't feel like they were enough. So we were kind of looking at that information, looking at actually as well how the socio-economic factors impact young people. So a lot of young people's experience through COVID will have been very, very different depending on their family situation, what it's like at home, and actually how COVID has impacted their parents. So actually the job that their parents are in means that there's a really wide spectrum from, say, some young people who we work with whose parents maybe they're in a single family home, their parent is a frontline worker, and actually they have just been kind of experiencing being at home on their own, having to fend for themselves, actually not being supported, to other young people who maybe their parents have been at home and actually their situation hasn't actually been as drastically altered. And so actually looking at what are the common themes and what are the wider themes that young people need to kind of be supported in. So that's a little bit wide. I can go into a bit more detail, but I'll pause for a second before I keep talking.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So I'm just thinking about how personalized the experience of COVID has been, as you've mentioned. I mean, it's because of demographics, it's because of family situations, it's because of the length of school closures. I mean, there's so many contributing factors to how kids are experiencing COVID. How have you seen the civil unrest impact the students that you serve? Because I know you work with a lot of diverse students.
Yeah, and I mean that's been obviously also just a huge thing. So there's been everything to do with COVID, and then that like coming on top. And I think actually one of the biggest, like honestly, one of the biggest challenges for us is because the work that we do is through live performance and ongoing mentoring, and we've been actually through this time looking at how our resources can become more and more remote. And I'll talk about kind of actually what we've been developing in this time in a bit. But actually, you know, one of the challenges is that we haven't had the same access to the young people that we work with that we would have had before, because we've been doing that in a live setting or in a mentoring setting. And so, you know, actually, you know, to honestly be able to say to you, this is how it's impacted our students, we don't necessarily have the same kind of knowledge about that in this time as we would have done before. But what we do know is that that all of this, I mean, like I think of some young people that we are in touch with, just the anxiety levels, their sense of, I mean, in New York, there's been a real kind of thing to do with feeling safe. And actually, you know, there's been, you know, lots of different things happening. So I think all of it, and I think what's happening as we're talking with educators as well, is that we're finding that as we've been developing resources specific to COVID, I think that the question about civil unrest and kind of all of that side of things is actually things that are really like, how is that being addressed? And that's probably as important, if not more so right now. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs as you're talking.
Yeah.
And thinking about how just that safety, providing a safe place for kids is really at the foundation of the pyramid. Yeah. And as you said, just providing that sense of security is paramount. So how can we use the arts to help kids process all of the big emotions that they're having about COVID, about the civil unrest? How can we use the arts to help them gain back that sense of safety and security?
Yeah. So I think we have such an incredible opportunity through the arts, through storytelling, to really be able to help young people connect with their emotion, their story, their journey. So one thing that I'll just begin by talking about is we have a program called Create, which usually is done in person, but actually is something that we are kind of beginning to actually release as a kind of remote resource. And Castle, who you will well know, Tamara, who I'm talking about, but their advice was actually how to work with young people off the back of this time, was actually use creative means to help them find their voice and tell their story. And that is what this program that we have does. It's a 10-week program, but we have different artists who are involved, and we have different streams from acting to songwriting and like musicianship to dance as well. And we have different Broadway or television actors, dancers, performers who are kind of teaching and imparting kind of their story and the journey, as well as facilitators. And the goal is to actually take students on a journey of actually being able to say, this is my experience, this is maybe how it relates to other people, this is maybe how it's similar, this is maybe how it's different, and actually here's a creative way I can begin to find my voice and tell my story. So that's one that we are actually just in the process of beginning to get ready to release to schools for them to be able to use. I think in terms of our wider productions, which are live, we have a new production which we've been developing through this time. So we have rap pop musicals, we use industry, Broadway, off-Broadway performers. We have a bank of performers. We have a really diverse bank of performers, so that wherever we go, we are taking stories around identity that young people can engage with, connect with. They don't have to be into theatre, they just have to be human, and actually it's music like they're used to listening to, so they can kind of engage with that. And then go, what we find is they'll be like, oh, I thought I was the only person who was feeling like this. Because around social emotional learning, often it's really hard for us to say, hey, actually, I'm not coping very well. And my coping mechanism right now is that I'm cutting myself, because these kind of things are really vulnerable and really difficult to actually open up and talk about. And so what we find is that being able to use a platform like performance is a way that actually young people can go, oh, I'm not alone. Maybe I can get some support, maybe I can get some help. And so the way that we do that with the different techniques that we use off the back of it, and then the ongoing curriculum that we have that's been developed with psychologists and medical doctors and educationalists, gives them a route to actually get the help and support that they need. Now, what we've had to do in this time as well is actually look at how we do that on a remote basis. So we're not just doing that live in person, but actually we have, again, in development, ways that actually we can be accessing young people in schools, in education settings, so that they can be connecting, not just when we can actually go into the school, because no school's going to have a traveling performance team in right now. So I can talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, there's some different things in answer to your question.
This is great. So what I'm hearing, Tamsin, is that you're really offering two different models of consumer and creator. And so with your programming, it's helping the kids to see through the power of story that they're not alone, like you said, which is incredibly powerful. And then also providing opportunities for them to create. So what I'm wondering is, what tips or practical applications would you give to people like Amy and Gail and Holly and Rainey and Margaret, who are joining us today, who are just like, okay, I know that my kids' mental health needs have increased. Like we're seeing reports almost on a daily basis about the needs that kids have. How would you say on a practical level that we as practitioners can use these ideas about consuming and creating to help our kids process?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of different stages of answer to that question. So I think from a really kind of base level stage, as in what can you do right now where you are yourself, kind of actually. So like one of the things that has been kind of, again, advised by Castle is actually finding ways for young people to creatively tell their story. So whether that is journaling, whether that is maybe using things like role play, which is like a simple way, like a simple acting technique, where you maybe start with having a scenario where two students actually kind of role play a situation that's been difficult, and then they get to kind of like look at what that looks like, and then maybe they can actually bring their own situation into doing that. So I think the goal behind that is actually helping facilitate ways creatively for young people to actually be able to open up and feel comfortable and feel like that they're not alone. You know, as an organization, we believe that every single life is worth living. We want every single young person to know that their life has worth and has purpose and has value, and that they are not alone, that whatever is going on, that they're not the only person who's struggling with that thing, that it might feel like they are, but actually, and so the more tools that we can get around them to actually be able to be vulnerable, to be able to open up. You know, another thing that we use in Create is actually really being able to look at, this might be my story and what my story looks like, but then this is somebody else's story, and we have different stories, and that's okay. And actually, how can we help and support each other? And going back to what you were saying about kind of civil unrest and kind of different things that have been going on in this country, we need to be resourcing our young people to actually be able to see the difference between themselves and other people, and then celebrate that and actually understand how to navigate that really well. And I think that techniques like role play can really help do that. So, I mean, there would be some really off the top of my head, simple things that maybe you could do. I think if you are interested in actually things like our Create program, which is a resource that actually you could use with your students, and saying this to people who are watching, that would be something that we would love to talk to you about. As I said, we're about to release the first episodes of that. So we would love for you to get in touch with us and just see if there's a way that we can actually help and resource you in that way. So that would be kind of a second stage.
Great. And Margaret said she would love to follow up with you. So just to let you know, as you're listening, we will be providing a follow-up email to you with links to Pure Creative Arts and Tamsin and her team, so that you can get in touch with them. Just so you know, Pure Creative Arts and Love in a Big World are working together, and we're continuing to explore ways that we can work together, because we, with Love in a Big World, also believe in using the arts and literacy, stories, the power of story, to help kids open up and share what's going on in their heads and their hearts. So we would be thrilled to make that introduction for you. One of the things I'm so taken with, Tamsin, is you keep coming back to this idea of story and the power of story. And you just mentioned that as we're looking at the issue of equity and diversity in our country, that each and every one of us, even though we've lived in the same place, even in the same period of time, we've each had a different experience. And that we really need to listen to one another's stories, because it can be eye-opening and heart-changing if we give space and time for that. When you're working with your students, and I know that you work with a wide range of kids, like from middle school all the way through college, and you have some college folks on your team, what are some of their learnings as they're going through this process of owning their own story?
Yeah, so I'd love to tell you some different stories, like from young people. So one would be, one would be a girl who was watching one of our productions, and so we would take our productions to like an entire school in a day. So that would be a big group of students watching that. And this particular student, as she was watching the performance, it was towards the end, and she ended up actually running out of the hall, like visibly really upset, like really crying. And I happened to be in that session just watching, I wouldn't have always been there, but I happened to be in just watching what was going on. And so an educator came and said to me, "Are you part of this organization?" Because I was just checking what was happening. And I was like, "Yes." And she was like, "Could you come?" And I was actually invited to come and be with that student and her friend as she was like sobbing, really, really upset. And in that moment, as I sat with her, I mean, that is just having a moment like that where you're invited in to the room of a really vulnerable moment with a young person, where obviously whatever she has been watching has triggered and caused some kind of reaction, is such an honor to be in that room and in that space. And I just was talking to her, and I could not get her to like say anything, because she was just crying so much. And as I kept asking her different questions, eventually she said to me, "It's not going to change anything." And in that moment, I was like, you believe that whatever is going on, that you telling me about that is never going to change. Like, you're in a situation that is so trapped and locked that that's never going to change. I don't want any young person to ever be in that situation. And I began telling her stories of other young people that we'd worked with who'd felt like they were in a situation, and talking to someone about it would not change anything, and actually how they'd been able to open up and talk, and actually how that had made a difference in their lives. And little by little, she calmed enough to actually tell me what had happened to her and the situation that had happened to her. And it was a really serious situation that she told me about. And so it took so much for her to actually open up and say that. But the thing that really struck me in that moment was, as soon as she told me, it was like her countenance changed. Like, she literally, it was like this cloud lifted off her and she was lighter. But nothing had changed in that moment, other than she'd opened up and she told me what was going on. And she now knew she was not the only person carrying the weight of this secret by herself. And from that point, she was then able to we were able to talk it through. I was able to connect her with like a team of mentors, counselors, and actually connect her family with the help and support that they needed. And she was actually able to go on through one of those 10-week programs and get that support. But I come back to that because the power of story, she was watching a story, and something about that story connected with her own story that meant that there was an emotional response that came up. So almost like, I feel like so often we're working with young people and they're like pressure cookers, and there's all this stuff like bubbling under the surface. And what we want is them to feel like they have permission to be able to open up and share that, because that's where actually we can see them become all that they were made to be, and actually get that stuff like get the support and the help that they need. So that was like, you know, one story, one example of like the power of story actually helping her open up and share her own story, and then that actually go on to actually shift the trajectory of her life. And yeah, so I can tell you more, but I'll pause again because
now, what I love is, again, that power of story to, like you said, trigger what's going on and to give grace and space for kids to share what's happening in their own world. And what I think is so important is to realize that tools like Pure and tools like Love in a Big World can just be kind of like that can opener, you know, that finally gets them to let it all out and then connect them to resources that they need that are there on a daily basis, so that there's follow-up. And I think that's critical to remember, is that it's not just there's no program that's going to fix anybody.
No.
It's relationship that changes people, and using story as a bridge to relationship. So kids know they can come out of the darkness of hiding those secrets, like you said, and come into the light and share what's going on with them is incredibly powerful and hope-filled.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, just going back to you for a second, like, I think that for us as an organization, that's why partnership and working with other organizations is so crucial, because I don't believe as one organization or any of us can do it on our own. But actually, the incredible thing is that as we come together and work with others that are planted in different areas, actually we can see more and more young people impacted and connected in to support that can actually really help them. So that's one thing I just love about kind of our relationship with you guys and other organizations like you as well. So, yeah.
Well, friends, we would love to open it up for some questions. So if you've got questions about what Tamsin and I have been talking about today, about using the arts to help with child and adolescent mental health, about the power of story, please go ahead and type those in the chat. We would love to hear from you. And as those questions come up, I will communicate those to Tamsin. So this would be a great time for you to share your thoughts and ideas and questions. Tamsin, tell us a bit more about, you've mentioned a few times about pivoting the work of your organization, as so many nonprofits have done during this time of COVID, to provide online support and remote resources to schools and other organizations. Tell us more about that work that you're doing now.
Yeah, so I think like our pivot began by creating this production, looking at a family. The production is basically telling the story of a family stuck in lockdown and what happens, and it's based on all the research that we've done about the felt needs. And that was a live production. But then we began to have different schools that we've been working with, like in the Bronx and different places, like call us up and say, hey, have you seen like Hamilton's just like come out on Disney Plus? And this a teacher that we work with, he was like, your show is like Hamilton, which is a massive compliment. And he's like, could you not film that? And actually, could we not use it? He's like, because none of our students are like coming. And so then we have begin to look at actually how can we create remote versions of our production. So both in terms of filmed versions of the live productions, but also we're in the stages of actually writing an educational series that's like more bite-sized sessions that can actually happen. And so then we marry that with ongoing curriculum. So we've developed a new curriculum. So the show that I was talking about, which is like a family stuck in lockdown, is called Home. And then we have a curriculum that partners with that called Home as well. And that, so they're kind of, I guess, a number of things that are either in development or about to be launched. And then the Create program, which is what I mentioned before, which would normally be an in-person kind of creative process, but actually we've developed that so that the first kind of episodes of that are going to be released this fall. And that's, again, a way that kind of 10 sessions that facilitators can take students through. Yeah.
Great. So Tamsin, do you have some resources that we can distribute via email to? Okay, please
Yeah.
send those.
Yeah, let's do that.
Include those in the follow-up email. Margaret had a question for us. Can you say more about a partnership? I love what your companies are all about.
Yeah. As in our partnership with each other? Is that?
I think so.
Yeah.
We can start there.
Yeah, so I think
it is also with Creative Education in Action in Toronto, Canada. So perhaps there's an opportunity for partnership with them as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of partnership, I know that we, as I said before, we really believe in working together and actually finding organizations or, you know, just places where there's real synergy. We are so much better together, and actually as we bring the gifts that we have. So I think one of the things I love when I met Tamara is I love Tamara's background and experience, and so Tamara and I have the common, if I say anything you're like, no, just jump in, but like we have the common thread of like passion of like ways to use the arts and tell story like we've been talking about, but Tamara's kind of expertise in terms of education and kind of all that she's been doing, and that I just love kind of what she brings and her perspective in that. So that's a real kind of blessing to us, I guess, that we can kind of like talk about that. So yeah, it's
really fun. And I what she's trying to say is just kidding. I have like all the research. I was going to call myself a name, but I won't do that. I do all the research background, right? Mm-hmm. And bring my perspective with all of that, and continuing to do deep dives. Maybe someday I'll talk more about all of that experience. So yeah, it's great to partner with another organization. I'm huge on collaborations, and like Tamsin said, I think all of us are stronger together. And given the times that we're living in, where funding is even decreased for services, I think we have to be willing to lay aside our own agendas and put kids and families first. So any way that we can elevate one another's work and lift each other up in the service of supporting and helping families and communities, I think we're better. We're better off for everyone. So closing thoughts, Tamsin.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I do believe that, so many people have asked so many different questions, like about this season, about COVID, about the fact that 2020 has not looked the way that we think it was going to look. But I do believe that we have such an opportunity in this time to actually really be able to engage young people. You know, mental health issues are on the rise, but I do believe that there is more openness in the education system than I've seen before to actually really work within the social and emotional learning needs of young people. And so I think from our perspective, we're just seeing this as a real opportunity to actually really be able to see young people and our schools and education actually come out stronger and come out better from the place that we're in, rather than something else. And we've got a lot of hope kind of for the future for that as well. So yeah.
That's great. And I would say I agree with you. What I'm seeing, I mean, having been in the field of education for the past 24 years and watching the pendulum swing from one side to the other, from focus on the needs of the whole child to focus on testing. And now we're trying to find that balance between having the rigors of academics and yet the focus on mental health and wellness. I'm encouraged by the openness of the conversation. And I think it's been the catalyst has been COVID. The catalyst has been the civil unrest. I'm hoping that we don't lose that balance, because we need both in order for our kids to be healthy and whole. With Love in a Big World, we define social and emotional learning as the ability to identify what's going on in your head and in your heart, so you can use your hands to build up and not tear down. So to give kids the opportunity to articulate through the power of story in all the different genres that you've talked about in art, whether it's dance or photography or acting or visual arts, I mean, whatever it is that they can use to tell their story, to get out what's going on in their head and going on in their heart, and unlock those secrets that they're carrying that often burden them down and cause that anxiety, is incredibly powerful. So thank you so much for the work that you do, Tamsin. Thank you for the partnership that we have together. One last comment from Rainey. She says, I also feel there's more openness. People have stopped to become so much self-centered because they're feeling we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, Rainey. I think we recognize that we need each other.
Yes.
And as Tamsin said earlier, that our stories matter. So Tamsin, thank you for being a champion for children and for letting them know that their stories matter.
Yeah, thank you for all that you're doing. Love that we've met. It's awesome. So yeah.
And friends, I will send a follow-up email to you with resources from Pure Creative Arts and a way for you to connect with Tamsin personally. Also, please be sure to check out the Love in a Big World website, and we have lots of new resources for you, and I'll share more of those in the newsletter as well. Until next time, my name is Tamara, and this is Love in a Big World. Thank you so much, and make it a great day.